All right, welcome everybody to Destination the Show, episode 1. My name is Jamie Cameron. I'm joined here by my good buddy Jeremy Nygaard. Jeremy, how are you doing?
I am doing great. Now that we've finally got this rolling, it feels good.
Finally got it rolling after weeks and weeks of planning. So wanted to start out, given that this is our first episode, with a little overview of who we are and what we're planning on doing. So Jeremy and I have been involved and in the weeds in draft coverage for Twins Daily for Brewer Fanatic and Northside Baseball, covering the Twins, Brewers, and Cubs over the past couple of years together. And we're specifically interested in minor league systems, the draft process, and even amateur baseball. So the good folks at Twins Daily recently expanded their coverage to the Brewers through Brewer Fanatic and the Cubs at Northside Baseball. And we want to cover more of the prospect and the minor league side of each organization. So the general plan for episodes at the moment is we'll have a few big topics that we cover every week. We want to make sure that we have listener involvement in every episode. So we're going to source questions. We want you guys to send us your feedback, your ideas. We're going to work to incorporate some interesting guests for you from the industry in the coming weeks and months, mock drafts when we get round to the 2024 draft cycle, and a ton of other fun stuff. So we're excited to kick off coverage of the minor league system of 3 very interesting organizations at the moment. Before we dig into our first topic of the day, we want to do some quick intros. So, Jeremy, we'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about how you started covering baseball and what specifically drew you to the minor leagues and prospect coverage.
Yeah, so I guess I've always been into the minor leagues. It goes back to my childhood when I'd pick up the Pioneer Press out of the mailbox on Sundays, and I would look at the statistics pre-internet, right? How was how'd the Salt Lake City Bees do or whatever. Uh, and the only way I knew that guys got promoted is when their stats in Double A or Single A or wherever didn't change, and then all of a sudden they showed up at the next level. But there was really no coverage of the minor leagues,
Mm-hmm.
and there was at that point very very little coverage of the draft. And then as that started to pick up, popularity, and I think the first year it was televised was like the year Ben Revere was drafted.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was big into actually following Seth Stowe's SethSpeaks.net. And I would email Seth quite a bit. And he at one point said, "Well, why don't you write something? I'll post it on my webpage." And that was kind of a big deal. It was the year that Trevor Story was drafted, and I don't remember what year that was, but that was really my first thing where it's like I'm gonna put some stuff out there, and could be very wrong, and could look very dumb, but it was fun, and it was something that then you could look back at, and see how close you were or how far away you were. And then Twins Daily got started, and it started with the group of guys that still does it, and I was invited to be a part of that early on to see if I could break the you know use the message boards, use this and use that.
Mm-hmm.
um, and I just had an interest in doing that. So 2011, I guess, is when that happened, and it's been 12 years since, and the draft has become a primetime event, and so it's been fun to kind of grow with it, um, and maintain interest, and then follow these guys, not only through the minor leagues but also their professional careers.
For sure. For sure. Great throwback reference, SethSpeaks.net. Shout out to Seth. Um, my name is Jamie Cameron. I really started uh, writing about the Twins at Twins Daily about 2017, 2018, maybe. And then I started writing on your coattails for draft coverage in the past couple of years. Um, the ambition of the site got such that it's too much for one person to cover, really, particularly when the draft coverage expanded to the Brewers and the Cubs at 3 different sites So we started really chopping up draft coverage really with the 2022 draft together, and then followed that up with the 2023 draft this year. And my big kind of side project there has been the consensus draft board that you will get sick of me talking about, where we work to rank around 250, 300 players from about 10 industry sources this year, and what I think is a first of its kind board, and ended up being a success and something that people were interested in and something that people used. But we found and really thought about through the draft process that there might be a more efficient way to do this. So here we are with podcast number 1. Last but not least, definitely want to introduce our amazing producer, Theo. Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into baseball coverage and prospect coverage.
For sure. So yeah, I mean, my profession is journalism, and that's how I kind of got into baseball coverage right out of college back in the spring of 2021. I was covering local high school baseball in River Falls, Wisconsin, and Western Wisconsin in general, as well as town ball. And then about 5-6 months later, I was brought on to Twins Daily. And since that was about a few weeks before that notorious lockout of the 21-22 offseason, all we really had to cover was, minor league signings. So you had your Curtis Terrys and a few other guys. So I started writing those up. And then eventually the season came around and Seth, sent out that email that we get press access through the Saints. And it just kept going and going. And I did a minor league report for most of last season. And I've gone out of my way to do some player features on Twins Daily from those guys who are, the Royce Lewis types when they're having those great years, but most recently did one on Anthony Prado, who was, kind of under the radar, consistent, but he just exploded with the Saints since being called up from Wichita this year. So it's stuff I enjoy to do. And, the minor leagues definitely are lacking in coverage from time to time. So whenever you get that opportunity to get those guys who, might not get more than a cup of coffee at the majors and just give them spotlight of that great period of time where they're just playing their best baseball they might ever play. It's just what I enjoy doing most. So, yep, and I will just be on the background making sure every video and everything else is working for these guys.
Love it. Love it.
Thanks, Theo.
Thanks, Theo. I hope what folks glean from that is that Theo is by far the one and only legit person operating in this space. So that's a little bit about us, a little bit about who we are. We're going to dig right into kind of our 2 major topics here for episode 1. We wanted to start off with an area of comfort for us, which is going to be doing some recaps of the 2023 draft classes for the Twins, Cubs, and Brewers. We will go in that order because that's the order that they drafted in the first round this year to whet folks' appetite for that. The first thing we're going to dig into today is hot starts for 2023 draftees. So we're going to take turns, Jeremy and I, to highlight a player from each organization's draft class that is off to a hot start in pro ball, or an interesting start in pro ball. It doesn't have to be a hot start. We're going to talk a little bit about the player, why they're an interesting choice, just to whet folks' appetite for more in-depth recaps of the 2023 draft classes, which will kick off with the Twins in a few minutes here. So let's start with the Twins. They picked first at number 5 overall. Jeremy, who is your pick for a hot start for the Minnesota Twins?
So I took the obvious choice, right? But the thing that I want to say before I talk about this is the consensus draft board was super cool, to the point that that's what I printed off and I used to see where these guys are getting drafted. So it was always one of those things where it's like, well, how do, Keith Law views the guy this way, Kyle McDaniel views the guy this way. How do you balance, a guy being so high and a guy being so low? And you did a really good job of doing that. So it was a tool that I used And I'm hoping that it becomes a tool that lots of people use because it's so neat. But what the one thing that the consensus board proved was that the Twins at number 5 we're going to have the opportunity to get one of those 5 that separated themselves, right? You saw that on the board. We knew that going into the draft. I was a little skeptical that it was going to happen because we heard no talk on Walker Jenkins. 0, right?
0,
and
nothing.
You said, don't worry, it's going to be fine. And I think that was you trying to talk yourself off the ledge.
Probably.
And me saying, hey, you know what? Maybe they're going to go a different way because it just doesn't make sense that someone that's so perfect for the Twins, I said it months ago, someone that's so perfect for the Twins wouldn't be talked about going to the Twins. And so having Walker Jenkins in the system signing on deadline day, right? So there was a little more panic for some people. And when's he going to sign? Why is he sign? He was going to sign. It was going to happen. But here he is now, 38 at bats in, 2 home runs, 13 hits, almost a 1,000 OPS, and it's in the complex league. And you look back at guys like Aaron Hicks, right, who not only didn't have success in the complex league, was sent back there to be in the complex league a second year. Yep. And so Walker Jenkins is, as a Twin, is the dude, and I love it.
Yep. Already tearing it up. Great pick. I need to pause to rewind to make fun of you for printing off a hard copy of the consensus board going into the draft, showing that you are truly the biggest draft nerd. But yeah, for sure, Walker Jenkins, amazing start. Cannot argue with that pick. Probably would have been mine. I'm going to instead go for the Twins' 3rd round pick. Prep, right-handed hitter Brandon Winokur, for a couple of reasons that I think he's super interesting. Number one, we heard over and over again going into this draft class that the Twins prefer college hitters.
Yep.
And it's time to throw that myth out with the garbage where it belongs, because they took Walker Jenkins, they took Charlie Soto, they took Brandon Winokur, they took Dylan Questad in their first handful of picks. Brandon Winokur is a guy they signed out of Newport Beach, California, 3rd round pick, 82nd overall. I think his bonus was in the realm of $1.5 million to sign him away from UCLA. And he is just an incredible athlete. 6'5" at 18 years old, 210 pounds. And with a guy like this, you never know how he's going to pan out, right? Because he's all tools, all athleticism, but he's off to a really interesting start that I think kind of highlights his strengths and his areas of growth, right? So in 56 bats in rookie ball, he's hitting 286, 344, 571 with a 915 OPS. He's already slugged 4 home runs. He's also striking out at about a 32% clip, which is pretty high, something to monitor, but he's in his first month as a professional baseball player. I think that Winokur and Jenkins are a pair that Twins fans can rightly be super excited about for the next 5, 6, 7 years. Okay, let's move on to the team that picked next in the draft. 13th overall was the Chicago Cubs. So Jeremy, who is your pick or your hot start or your interesting start for the Cubs?
So the Cubs pick, am I back on? I tried to mute myself, but I didn't see you. You got me? Good. Yeah. So I again went the cheap route and went with Matt Shaw. And I went with Matt Shaw because when the Twins were talking, are they gonna try to float somebody by spending less money? Matt Shaw was one of my favorites. Yep. And he's had a really good start. Statistically, I have his page up here. He's now up at high A, which we like to see that. And 45 at bats at high A, 2 home runs, 3 home runs total.
Mm-hmm.
He's struck out 8 times. He's drawn 5 walks, and he has a combined OPS of almost 1,200.
So
So
legit.
we're gonna have a little video here of Matt Shaw, and just show that he can. I mean, this is opposite field home run. Like, how do you not like that?
He's so legit.
And he has 5 stolen bases. That was another thing. The power, the speed, the combination of what he brings to the table is exciting for any team. The Cubs were just lucky enough to take him. My favorite infielder. Is it going to work, long term? Who knows? But I love the pick, and I'm glad that he's having success.
Yep. Love that one too. Matt Shaw, definitely a favorite of mine. Also, heading into that draft class, a really strong crop of college infielders. My Cubs pick is going to be a little off the beaten path. Zaire Hope is my Cubs pick. 11th rounder. I'm a sucker for mid-round guys. 11th rounder, 326th pick overall. Here's why I think Zaire Hope is interesting. So he's listed as a center fielder, lefty, 18 years old, 6 foot, 190 pounds, super athletic. The Cubs were in a position in this draft where they did not have a ton of money and they didn't have a ton of picks. And they did what I think most teams should do in that situation, which is for a good number of their picks, they picked pretty safe, high floor guys. We'll dig more into that when we recap the Cubs draft. Zaire Hope does not fall into that category. He's a guy with some serious ceiling, some serious tools, and some serious athleticism. So his numbers, early days for the ACL Cubs in the Arizona Complex League, hitting 292 with a 469 on base percentage, 542 slugging, 1.011 OPS, already has 2 home runs, already has 7 RBIs. That is a super small sample size. We're going to see a video of him here, a little grainy, but we do what we can. I think he has a ton of potential, a ton of athleticism, a ton of tools, like I said, and he's a little bit of an outlier in a Cubs draft that was filled mostly with safer picks that was kind of a product of their draft circumstances. So Zaire Hope, keep an eye out for him. He's a really interesting prospect. Last but not least, they picked the 18th overall, I believe, in the first round. And I don't want to spoil what's coming up a couple of weeks out, but the Brewers crushed this draft, in my opinion. One of my absolute favorites. So, Jeremy, who is your Brewers hot start pick from their class?
So, I didn't go with the first round pick this time, but I did go with the pick that was my favorite at the time. And I think a lot of people's favorites, because it lended itself to the question, how are they going to get this guy signed? And that was 6th round pick Cooper Pratt, high school kid that's compared to a right-handed Gunnar Henderson, who we've seen play very, very well for Baltimore. 6'4", 18-year-old shortstop. We got a little video here. Look at the swing.
Yeah, that'll work.
Look at the swing. It's just, what's not to like about it? If teams knew that he was signable in the 6th round, like, I don't know if we're watching this, it's just, we could watch it all day. And I think we're watching, it on loop. But I'm gonna have to leave my screen here since I've lost focus again. But Cooper Pratt, to me, great pick. It'll be great for the Brewers. He's gonna be one of the higher prospects that they have, and you look forward to see what he can do and how fast he can do it. Still the complex league, but there's a chance that he can move pretty quick.
For sure. Love that pick. Hard to argue with any of your choices, man. Even though you picked 2 first rounders. For me, for the Brewers, I'm going to go for their second round pick, 54th overall, Mike Bove or Bovey. I've heard this pronounced both ways. I'm sure someone will correct me and get me right on that. He was a really interesting prospect. I want to go back and see where we had him on the consensus board now, but I want to say he was in the top 75. We've got a video of him coming up. He's now at high A, Wisconsin for the Brewers. The skinny on him coming out of college, where he went to Omaha, Nebraska, which was a smaller school, was that he had one of the best hit tools in the entire draft class, but played against not as great opposition. And he is off to an absolutely electric start across 2 levels. Started out in rookie ball, already promoted to high A, which is a nice kind of aggressive path. He leads, I believe, 2023 draftees in home runs so far with 5. 53 at bats. He's hitting 396, 484, 736, like a 1200, over a 1200 OPS. Almost as many walks as strikeouts. Ton to like about him. He is one of my favorite prospects in the entire draft class. The Brewers got him for a good deal under slot, and we'll dig more into that when we covered their draft review. But I absolutely loved what they did with this class. I think Mike Bovey's going to be an absolute stud. Definitely want to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one.
Okay. So that's some prospects that are off to hot starts from the 2023 draft. Second chunk of time for today, our kind of last big feature. Then we'll finish up with some questions that folks kindly sent in. We are going to do a little bit more of an in-depth draft review on the Minnesota Twins. We'll spend a little bit of time digging into some of their most notable picks, and then both Jeremy and I will give a little overview of a kind of under-the-radar pick that we like from this class. But before we dig into prospects, and we've touched on a few already, Jeremy, overall impressions or thoughts on the Twins draft class. How do you think they did? How did they come away, in your opinion?
I really liked it. I think with their bonus pool, they had a lot of options as far as how they wanted to pursue, certain guys, and then how they wanted to disperse their money. And when they took Jenkins, it kind of limited some options later.
Mm-hmm.
But really, even when they got to taking Soto, they could have taken someone cheaper and really spread out that money again. So they played it mostly by the book. I think there wasn't some huge underslot signing. I think around 10 signed for less.
Mm-hmm.
But they really just kind of played it by, hey, we're going to take the best guy on our board. We're going to give him the money that, is near slot. We take some prep guys. But overall, I thought they had a really solid draft. Took a lot of pitchers. Took a lot of pitchers from non-Power 5 schools, which I think is by design because they're gonna coach these guys up. They're gonna add some velo, and they're gonna have success in the near future. So I was really happy with their draft. I think any draft that involves a handful of prep guys is a little bit more fun, and you kind of alluded to that earlier too. So I was a fan of their draft. I didn't put it in the top 3. Some people did nationally, and I'm pretty happy with that. But
Callis did, I think.
Who did?
Callis. I think Jim Callis had them in his top 3 or 4 or 5, somewhere in that range.
So I give credit to them for doing that. I personally, I thought it was a very solid draft. Mm-hmm. And if you can back up a few solid drafts next to each other, you're going to have success as a big league team.
Yep, for sure agree with that. And that certainly is the trend if we look back at the Twins 2021 and 2022 draft. In the case of 2021, obviously, a lot of those players aren't in the organization anymore, but that's the topic for another day. One quick thing I want to say on the Twins draft class before I ask you to defend a position that you threw out on Twitter in just a second is I hope when 2024 rolls around that we can all ignore a little bit more of the noise that comes with draft rumors. Because Twins Twitter and Twins social media and anyone that follows the team who's interested in the draft was in fits about Jacob Gonzalez heading up to the draft. A lot of the national guys said the Twins are being heavily linked to Gonzalez. What did they do? They chose Walker Jenkins. They took the guy who was the best player available on the consensus board. The Twins are tight-lipped when it comes to the draft. They're tight-lipped when it comes to free agency. So I hope we can collectively work to avoid some of the mass hysteria in 2024. Now, on to you defending a position.
Yes.
So you tweeted something out, did, whatever it's called now, maybe a week ago, that no one really said anything about, but I noticed, Jeremy, you said that your comp for Walker Jenkins as a pro is Max Kepler.
Yeah. What exactly did I say?
And I need you to tell me a little bit more about what you mean.
Yeah. So I think what I said, or what I tweeted or zeeted, was that my comp for Walker Jenkins is the player that everybody wanted Max Kepler to be. Right? The super athletic outfielder that has an arm for right, but has the speed for center, hits 30 home runs, steals the bases, looks really good doing it, right? Everything that we wanted Max Kepler to be, what Max Kepler was in the Bomba season, essentially, was going to be what Walker Jenkins could be. Now, the ceiling might even be higher, and really it's an unfair comp from the perspective of we want him to be, or the comp is what we wanted Max Kepler to be. So that's kind of a ceilingless comp already, because we wanted Max Kepler to be an MVP, right? We wanted Max Kepler to be the greatest baseball player ever, things like that. And I think that from that perspective, it's not an unfair comp, because the floor of Walker Jenkins and what we saw Max Kepler do for 3 months this season could be the same too. You have a very athletic left-handed, maybe a center fielder, could be a right fielder.
Mm-hmm.
What if Walker Jenkins doesn't elevate the ball?
You saw the swing. You saw the clip that we just played, right?
Well, yeah, but Max Kepler has a good-looking swing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There was people that would compare Max Kepler's swing to Joe Mauer's swing. Like, that was a real thing. And obviously Max Kepler was 16 years old, and Max Kepler didn't really understand the how to do the baseball thing, and that's why he had problems, because he kind of blew out his elbow trying to impress people by throwing the ball without being warmed up. Like, he was not from the United States. He didn't have a baseball background, so it all kind of came at a different pace. But when we see Max Kepler performing at his best, he's really, really good. And that's what I think we want Walker Jenkins to be. How good could a Max Kepler be? I think we're still seeing the potential, which is weird to say for someone that's been in the league as long as he has. But for me, it's a fair comp, and it's an easier comp for Twins fans to understand than to say, oh, Kyle Tucker, right? Because I think that's another one that we hear. But if you don't watch the Astros, I don't think you appreciate Kyle Tucker. And I don't know that Kyle Tucker's swing is he's got his own unique swing, right?
Yep.
And so I think there's it's an easy one for people to understand. And that's why I threw it out there, because who is this 18-year-old? Nobody really knows. And so people, I think, liked that comparison, except for you.
Fair enough. Yeah, for sure. Definitely makes sense. I think that's generally the problem with comps, right? One, they're pretty unfair on a player, and often we're not like specific enough with what we mean. Like, do we mean like an aesthetic comp where the swing is similar, or a pitch is similar, or behaves in a similar way, or do we mean like a production comp? And I think that's why I like Kyle Tucker for Walker Jenkins as kind of like a 99th percentile Walker Jenkins production looks like Kyle Tucker, like 4 to 4.5 win player, 30 bombs, 100 RBIs, 15% strikeout rate, whatever. But let's move on and dig a little deeper into the draft. Let's talk about pick 34. 34, you already brought this up. The Twins selected Charlie Soto, prep right-handed pitcher out of Florida. What did you think about this pick? Was there anyone else on the board at the time? And sorry if I'm putting you on the spot. Was there anyone else on the board at the time that you were interested in? And what do you think we can expect from Soto when he starts throwing as a pro?
Yeah, so as a matter of fact, when it got to this point and people were on Twitter saying who's going to be in consideration, you said Charlie Soto.
I did.
Right. And I was like, maybe Thomas White. Maybe you take the best left-handed pitcher available. And in hindsight, I don't know that I would have taken one or the other, but I do know that Charlie Soto signed for $2.48 million. Which
White was pricey.
Yeah, but Soto, I mean, 2.48 at that point was pick value was he signed for a slot. And so the Twins are like, we're not saving any money. We're doing it. And the Marlins, who had already taken Noblemeyer, who I was like, yeah, Noblemeyer, great pick. Turn around and then take Thomas White and give him 4 and a 4.1.
Yeah.
4.1. And the slot was 2.42. So when you give me those choices, I would say, yeah, you'd take Soto.
Yep.
But at the time, I would have been like, well, I think White's better. But for that difference in price and what you would have to do after that, I just don't necessarily think you could pull that off. Now, what's Charlie Soto going to be? Who knows, right? He's a big dude. And so as much as, we look at Charlie Soto like we look at Marco Rea because they're prep guys that you're probably going to handle with kid gloves. Marco Rea is a compact, should be able to repeat his delivery. And so Soto is just a longer lever dude, right? And so I think it's going to take longer for him. He hasn't thrown yet, which I think is not abnormal. What are they had 4 guys from this draft class throw?
Yeah.
And so I don't know. Like, will he get into games this year? Or they just hold him off for their camp so they can make their tweaks, and which they will. And I think they call it, velo camp or whatever their thing is. And what are they going to do to him? Because he's young, and the Twins, for the most part, don't have a ton of this type of prospect entering into their organization.
Right. Not at all. Not at all. So many of their pitching prospects are guys who, like you mentioned before, right? Like not big name schools who they brought in and developed. And the Twins, I think, now have a well-established reputation for adding velocity to guys. Charlie Soto already has hella velocity. So I'm really interested to see what he looks like when that's all said and done. On whether he'll pitch this year, one thing I do think is interesting is he had a pretty light schedule, to the best of my knowledge, in his final prep season, where he was pitching about every 7th day, limited number of innings, limited number of appearances. So who knows? It's really hard to predict. I do think the Raya comparison is interesting simply in terms of how they might move him along slowly. I think one thing that folks appreciated with Raya, right, was like he would get 3 innings at a time and not be exposed to super high pitch counts. Although now he's been pushed up to AA as a 20-year-old and is struggling significantly.
Bad.
So
he's been bad.
It's been a struggle.
So we could talk about this maybe next week or next time we talk about the Twins. Do you think the timing of the promotion around the trade deadline was a coincidence, or a look what we've got here, this shiny toy that isn't so shiny. Theo points out that Soto doesn't turn 18 for 2 more weeks.
Yeah.
Which is impressive. It's, for me, it's fun to have these types of prospects in the system.
For sure.
Are they going to pan out? The odds would say of those two, one of them definitely doesn't, and the other one probably doesn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is those are also the types of guys that turn into the Clayton Kershaws of the world.
Yep.
And the greatest pitchers. And so that's what makes it fun, even though the failure rate is so high. And could Soto become a great front of the, a top of the rotation pitcher? Sure. But there could also be a lot of other outcomes that are not nearly as promising.
Yep, for sure. Agree with you there. Okay, let's talk. We'll dig in a little bit on one more pick here, and then we'll do our kind of under the radar picks. Pick one each, and then we'll get ready to call it a day here. I do want to come back to Brandon Winokur and dig in on him a little more. I've gotten a lot of questions about him, and naturally, like a hot start, already hit 4 home runs. He is generating a lot of buzz, as he should. What do you think the ceiling is there? What are the question marks or the things that you're going to be paying attention to as he gets more games, more playing time, more plate appearances under his belt as a pro?
2 things. How much does he strike out?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's always the thing with high schoolers, right? He's playing against, I mean, in the grand scheme of it, probably baseball players that weren't as good as the circuit guys that he was playing against.
Mm-hmm.
So how much is he striking out against these complex league guys? It's not high quality baseball, and so he should have success. Strikeouts are not going to go down as he gets older if he doesn't, change something.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one for sure. Secondly, what position is he playing defensively? Because he's playing shortstop right now, which is cool. It's super cool. He's not going to be a shortstop, but is this the Twins saying, are we going to give him an opportunity to be a baseman long term? Because he's a bigger dude, and that could be a real thing. You'll let guys play out of the dirt as opposed to trying to get guys to play into the dirt. So long term, I mean, yeah, he could end up being a right fielder or left fielder, and Jenkins could be in center field or right field. But that's the thing to me. Like the home runs are cool, the power's cool. But the where is he playing defensively? How much does he strike out? And kind of less importantly, is he ever going to figure out how to drop his bat without putting people in danger? If Theo could get a clip of that, the dude throws his bat like a 12-year-old.
Well, but that's what happens when you're like 7'6" already at 18 years old.
I would bench kids. You've seen this.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
If Theo gets a clip, we'll pull that up. But those are the 2 things I'm watching.
For sure, love that. And agree. I actually think he's like a sneaky pick for center field long term. Speed wise is like really, really off the charts for a 6'5" dude. And if anyone is bored and needs something to do, pull up footage of him at the MLB draft combine, because his batting practice was an absolute show.
Instead, we're going to pull up this video.
Instead, here we go.
Watch the bat.
Watch the bat.
Like, that's a bat flip, and that wasn't super violent, but the ones that he that's pretty fun, actually. But the bat, look at where the bat is. Like, if the Twins are on the other side, he's gonna hit the guy in the on deck circle. That's scary.
Something to work on. Something in a development plan, man.
Yeah. I hope
all right, let's wrap up the Twins with one more question. We're each gonna pick a guy from the later rounds, mid to later rounds, that intrigues you, that excites you, and just give a little bit of an overview of like, who is this prospect? Why do you think they're worth paying attention to? Just so we give a little bit of love to guys in the mid and later rounds. So Who's your guy?
So Cade Bragg, drafted in the 17th round, lefty, Angelo State. So D2 guy. He was a Texas A&M commit, but had some arm issues. ended up kind of bouncing around and being really, really good at Angelo State. How does that translate? I don't know. He said in the interview with Ted that he was like a 97% fastball guy. So he's beaten D2 guys with just his fastball. And the Twins are going to, he credits his coaching, but I can assure you that what he's going to get this fall is going to be better than anything he's ever heard before. And he's a 17th rounder. So if it's a miss, it's not a huge miss, but it could be a steal. The other name, and you wanted a low round pick, and I like to cheat on these things.
Yes, you do.
Tanner Hall, 4th round pick, is going to be a really good baseball player.
Yep.
Underrated by all standards right now. I think one of the best changeups in baseball, right? That's what you wrote. And he's going to add velocity because that's what the Twins do.
Yep.
And he's going to be maybe 92, 93 now, but if he's 96, 97 with his changeup, what's the ceiling on that guy? Yep. So Cade Bragg, but don't sleep on Tanner Hall because we haven't talked about him, and I think he's going to be the real deal. What do you got over there?
Like that pick. Tanner Hall also hasn't debuted. Someone was asking me about that the other day. I'm going to go with a pitcher also because I think the Twins have earned a lot of leeway with drafting college pitchers in the mid and later rounds in recent years. If you look at the current Cedar Rapids rotation, it's like 5 guys that they drafted in 2022 who have already moved up a level.
So good.
So good. So encouraging. So my guy's going to be Ross Dunn. Ross Dunn is a pitcher that they drafted in the 10th round, 297th overall. He was actually someone who I wrote up for the big board, and I only write up guys that are in the top 100 for the big board. So at the beginning of the college season, he was a top 100 draft prospect, ended up as 163 on the consensus board. So still getting pretty good value there. And so, with no disrespect intended, has like a little more pedigree against some better opposition than some of the other later round pitchers that the Twins drafted. He pitched in the Pac-12, 4.27 ERA in 2023. That might not seem very exciting. In 2023 college baseball, that's pretty good. A lot of ERAs in the 5s and 6s. Here's the catch. 65 innings, 44 walks. So the question is going to be, can he throw strikes? In that same 65 innings, 84 Ks. So you can see the stuff is there. Fastball is already 93 to 95, has at least like an above average slider and a usable solid changeup. Can he throw strikes? Can the Twins harness his already very interesting stuff? Another guy who has not debuted yet, who I would be paying close attention to.
How long do you give him? How long is his leash as a starter before you say, well, because his stuff will play in the bullpen, right?
Sure will.
So how long do you give him before? Like, is it 2 years? Is it you just let him start until you need a reliever? Like, how would you let that play out? And this is totally putting you on the spot.
Yeah, you are. I think the Twins will be patient. The Twins have a track record of patience, I think, with their pitching prospects. I think his upside as a starter, if he can start, the value is so much significantly higher than just a bullpen arm. They'll give him at least a couple of years and see what he can, make of himself as a starter if he can throw strikes consistently. And then, like you said, the backup plan is there. And that's really the reality for a good number of the pitches that they drafted. Some will continue on as starters. I do think this 2022 class that we alluded to, which is the entire Cedar Rapids rotation, is pretty unusual. So I would urge people not to expect the exact same thing from 2023, because I think an unusual, not hit rate, but an unusually good class early on so far is that 2022 group of pitchers. But I think the Twins will give them a chance to start at least a couple of seasons and see what happens. Okay, that'll do for Twins draft. In next week's episode, we'll dig into the Cubs in more depth. We'll finish off the show with a couple of listener questions. I'm going to use it quotes because we don't technically have listeners yet. But put out the call for some questions, and some people kindly responded. Definitely want to take the little and often approach to questions. So we'll try and get through a couple per week using Twitter. If your question wasn't answered this week, it probably will be in the next show or two. First question that I'm going to throw at you comes from Josiah Waldner on Twitter, who is always down to talk prospects and the draft and the twin system. He says, any chance we see Jenkins and Winokur at low A this year? Jeremy, what say you?
I would say there's certainly a chance, right? And I think the chance is probably helped by the fact that it's the same place, right? So you want to see what these guys have. It's pretty easy to say, hey, we're going to have you play against some better quality. They're not going to do any damage. My bigger question is, if we're going to promote either of those guys out of the complex league, wouldn't we send them to Cedar Rapids and let them play meaningful baseball, right? The Colonels have already clinched a playoff spot. They're going to be playing later. That's the bigger question for me, especially if Jenkins more than Winokur. If Jenkins can keep it going, why wouldn't you? Right? You want to know where to start him next year. You could aggressively start him at high A next year and have him skip low A. And I'm going to save more of my thought for the next question because I can explain why that's kind of a better idea.
Okay.
But yeah, I think there's certainly a chance.
I think there's a chance. I don't think they will. That's my 2 cents on that. Just got to play devil's advocate to you, man.
Okay.
One more question. TJC_612 will use Twitter handles. Says, looking at stats of earlier picks from this year, many are off to hot starts. Seems like more than normal. Do you guys agree? What's your thoughts on that?
So the elimination of the short season ball has really compacted the quality of players. So it's there without having E-Town, right? You have these college players that start in the complex league, which they never did before. They're signing quicker. They're playing more. They kind of have to get their feet wet, and they're going to hit, and then they're going to be promoted and go. And so it's not just that, wow, these guys feel like they're off to hottest starts. That's the truth. But they're also playing at higher levels because there's less levels. You come into the system one promotion closer to being a Major League Baseball player than you ever did before. And so I think that's why it's not unheard of to say, yeah, these guys could play at a higher level, right? Brooks Lee, AAA, 12 months after being drafted. Zach Neto, Major League Baseball, 9 months after being drafted.
Angels
You didn't see this before because there were so many players. Right now they're limited to 180. So you got to see what guys can do quicker before you have to decide if we want to keep them around or if we want to move on from them. And that's really the reality of these of all of this is teams have to make decisions quicker because you don't have an unlimited amount of spots to put your guys. And so hot starts, yep, move them up. And you see that, like how many guys have played at 2 levels before? That never happened before. College guys go to E-Town. High school guys and foreign guys, you're going to go play in the complex league. And that's why the promotions didn't happen as quickly either, because you were going from the Gulf Coast League to Elizabethton to Cedar Rapids back to Fort Myers. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So it's just the pattern for the Twins. It's more linear. And it's on a quicker path. So I think that's absolutely true. And it makes a lot of sense why it's true when you think about the numbers.
Does make sense, and that's a lens I wasn't thinking of when I saw this question. So let me add on. Let me yes and your answer a little bit here, because I think there's one kind of factor that's really 2023 specific that makes that true also, which is this draft just gone was like historically strong, like best draft class since 2011 strong. I think was how Keith Law characterized it. And the reason for that, or one of the reasons for that, is the 2020 draft was shortened by COVID to 5 rounds. So you had a ton of high impact high school or prep talent that came up, and they didn't want to take their chances in a 5-round draft. So you had this huge swell of talented players go on to college, and that kind of bloated the amount of talent available in this year's class, such that you had a really good high school class in 2023 and this exceptional college class that was really kind of buoyed by kids who didn't get drafted or chose not to enter the draft in 2020. So this 2023 draft was really the last kind of ripple effects of the pandemic and the 2020 shortened draft. When we start previewing the 2024 draft, it's not as fun. So I do think that has a part to play in it too. But thank you guys for the questions, and thanks to other folks who sent questions along. We will be sure to kind of bookmark those and come back to them next week. That'll do it for today for episode 1. I want to thank you guys for checking us out, whether that's on YouTube or whether that is on a podcast platform, Spotify, iTunes, or anywhere else. We would appreciate if you can leave us a positive review if you enjoyed what you heard today. If you want to shoot us feedback, we'd love to hear it on Twitter. Obviously, this will evolve as we get our feet wet, and we really want to create a podcast and content that folks want to listen to. So don't be a stranger. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you're looking for. Thanks so much for checking out episode 1. We will be back next week with episode 2. Until then, see you later.
So long.